Hi, this is Florian from LifeScienceMentor.com. Today is day 14 of the 180-day Idea Machine Challenge, and we are going to be talking today about 15 ideas, for articles that would be great to read. Fascinating investigative reports, various topics, and I have actually realized that there are three areas where I really would like to know more in form of a newspaper article, where new information could be put out that hasn't been pursued yet, or there was once a topic that was big in the news and then kind of like faded away. There are like past events from history. Then there are current events and something pointing into the future. And I found something from each area. So number one is actually, what's the deal with drugs? So for some people, drugs are miracle pills. For others, they are like pure tools of the devil. And usually it's very emotional. So you can't really talk to people and tell them, like, listen, coffee is, if you wish, a drug as well, and alcohol is a drug as well, but both are legal, right? And then other drugs are illegal, and sometimes for health reasons, I like to believe, sometimes for pure political, economic reasons. I know that that kratom is illegal in Thailand, but that is not due to any harmful effects that have been recorded. No, this is due to traffic monopolies that various companies that were close to the government directly after World War II wanted to secure. And so kratom was banned. And then once you ban something, then you can start the storytelling, right? You can tell, oh, it's probably unhealthy, and nobody really, even when the original problem doesn't exist anymore, once you put a ban in place in a law, it just stays there, right? And then there are other drugs that are considered legal, right? Other substances like aspirin, which has its own harmful side effects, but aspirin is approved by the FDA, is legal, whereas other substances maybe even have less of a problem, like marijuana or other substances are legal. And then nicotine is legal again. So it's very confusing, and I like to have an overview, which drug has been banned, why. So have historic reasons, economic reasons, and such an overview would have a good could serve as a beginning for a more rational, more reasoned discussion, right? So you could basically have two different effects. One would be drug being considered healthy and or without much side effects and completely unhealthy, and the other axis would be legal versus illegal in most countries in the world. And then you could see whether that really correlates, and you could place several drugs on points there and correlate that, and then realize what real problematic drugs are and which are not. So that would be my first wish for an article. And the second part of that would be the war on drugs. So what happened to it? So there was a big war on drugs, and if you followed Narcos from Netflix, it tells the story of the Colombian drug lord. The name I've forgotten again. And they tell the story, and for example, it was clear that at a certain time they show that in the mid of the 80s, the war on drug has had less priority than the war against communist countries in Southern America, and those two were intertwined. And some reason the war on drugs has fizzled out, was not successful. Was it successful? Who knows? What are some more efficient measures to stop the problems that drugs bring with them? right? So Portugal and Switzerland have completely legalized. So you could compare like efforts like to combat drugs militarily, even treated as a war, with efforts to be completely legalizing. And then in this report, you would compare both methods and see where they are successful and not. And maybe they're successful in some instances and others not, so you can differentiate. That would be a great article I'd read. Where would I publish them? The first one, what's the deal with drugs? I would probably publish in Time magazine because it has a lot of historic connotations, and probably also the war on drugs in Time magazine. It's more like an essay, or maybe New Yorker if you must, like for a longer expose or several over several pages. Number 3, does crime pay? How many perpetrators in history have actually been caught? So, do you get away with crime? Is there a perfect crime, or did they end up catching every perpetrator? So, for example, it could have the rate in which crimes have been solved versus new developments. One point, people figured out how to take fingerprints. So, did the crime rate drop down then? And if yes, how long did it take until thieves and murderers caught up and wore gloves, right? Has the death penalty had what effect really has the death penalty on the reduction of the crime rate? And you could compare developments in organized crime to the efforts to catch them. That would be a fascinating correlation, and would maybe also shed light whether it makes sense to prosecute small crimes, whether if you stop small crimes, stop the bigger crimes as well. These are questions that an article could talk about, and I would publish that in Time magazine as well. Then number 4, are today's career paths really so much different from the past? So a lot of authors have said that nowadays corporations, companies hate you. That James Altucher brought that famous word, and so it seems like those were the good old times when you applied with 19 years for a job, had an internship, then started in a company, and then left at 65 years of age with a golden watch. However, I talked to my great uncle, and he said basically over his career, he was an accountant, and over his career he changed employers 4 or 5 times, and he retired 10 years ago. So clearly, it hasn't always been that clear cut. One company you start and you stay in the whole company. So what really changes? Are just the types of jobs more short-lived we have nowadays, or are companies really trying to get rid of more workers? What's the deal with that? So I'd like to see a report like that in something like Business Insider or New York Times. That would be a good outlet for that type of report, because it's about business, it's about society. Number 5 would be the makings of business moguls. So some entrepreneurs start when they are 20 years old, right? And then they make it in their business with 40 years or 50 years. Other entrepreneurs start when they are 40 or 50. And so they also make it just a little bit later. So are younger entrepreneurs more experimentative? Are they trying out different things and then switching fields more quickly? And do older entrepreneurs rely more on their experience? Or are both types do both have a sense or a nose for business and are as experimental or as conservative in comparable ways? That would be interesting to know. Article like that in Business Insider or Inc.com, Forbes magazine, something like that. How to run a business when competition is cutthroat. I'd like to know how pirates like Blackbeard or Klaus Störtebeker in Europe build up their empires. they couldn't rely on any societal structures, and that would probably be comparable to how mafia families built their business. So those families or those empires are all outside the law. Yet those people build lucrative businesses, and it's not like they steal something and then they live in the shadows and hope to never be caught. No, they are running legitimate businesses, and sometimes it takes decades until they are caught. And I'd like to know how you build a business when you have to operate outside normal structures of society. There would be an article for a podcast platform like Hardcore History from Dan Carlin. They wouldn't have a place there. Or any other podcast or blog that talks about tribal structures, how empires form, politics, something like that. Number 7, the history of slavery. So, the overwhelming part of slavery that is talked about in the US is black people enslaved, because it was a big part of the American Civil War, and is a big part that is slavery is a big part of many stories that that basically tell the story of how this nation came to pass. Yet just recently I picked up a Facebook post that discussed another problem of slavery, and they talked about how Muslim cultures enslaved blacks in the past, and how that was connected to the black slave trade. And then the Romans had slaves, and slavery has been a part of human history. And I'd like to know. I'd like to see an investigation or historic report, to see, what the driving forces were of slavery, what different kinds of slavery there were, how many people have been enslaved over the years, decades, centuries, and that would be good to see the whole dimension to what people can do to other people, and adds to our historic understanding, and lets us think about ways to combat that in the future, and to see humanity in a more realistic light. That would have its place also in a podcast series like Hardcore History. I'm a huge fan of that podcast series. It's really good. Then number 8, I call From the Drawing Board to Your Kitchen. What makes an invention get to mass market? A lot of people that invent stuff or formulate the laws that make it possible to invent stuff, they are not reaping the benefits of that. There were a lot of different versions of the steam engine until James Watt and others came up with a design to put it into place and actually started the Industrial Revolution. So why do some inventions or discoveries not come to fruition, and others do? Do you have to have a very well connected person with a lot of foresight that just starts to feature a new discovery and show it to his friends, and then they start implementing it, and so it goes viral, basically? Or is there a critical mass of discoveries that all add to one principle, like the steam machine, and then all of a sudden just takes off at one point? So this would be a fascinating story to research. It basically feeds back into my article I had a little bit earlier about a course on Coursera or Udemy that shows you how to spot trends. And clearly inventions are basically the fruition of trends as well, if you will, right? So an invention doesn't just fall from the sky and then anyone all of a sudden wants to use it. There needs to be demand for it. So how do you address that demand? How do you address that demand, right? That would be a part for a blog that talks about history of science. Number 9, was Malthus worth his Malthus? The effects of population growth. So Malthus' principle basically stated that while the population growth exponential, the resources only grow linearly. And so he predicted that at one point population growth would surpass the supply of nutrients, and so then society would collapse. Like in an ecosystem, when one class of predators takes over, it reduces the number of prey so much so that it doesn't have the prey and it dies out. So the predator population rises and then drops off because the prey cannot reproduce as much as the predators are multiplying. So, but yet the predictions for Malthus have not exactly been true. Maybe they haven't been true yet, or maybe his thinking was flawed. I like to see an overview of population growth, and I like to see how certain measures have started to chop off population growth. Are there any forces at play to stabilize that? Maybe there are some natural forces that societies just don't reproduce as much anymore if we go over a certain threshold. Or are we threatened more than ever by population growth? Just because it has vanished from popular conscience, it's not something that needs to be gone forever, right? So nobody really has talked about that. I'd like to have that talk picked up. New York Times, good outlet. Time Magazine, maybe. Although this problem is more topical, so it would be something for the New York Times. I can taste it sweetly, number 10, in the food tonight. So we acknowledge that nowadays there's a huge problem with obesity in the US, maybe also worldwide. And if you compare maps, then this is really striking. There are maps that show the percentage of obese people in America in the 1960s and 1980s and 2000s. And you can see that in 1960s, nobody is really obese. There's very, very rare cases of obesity. Then 1980, many more cases, and in 2000, almost the whole US is obese. So those are one, maximum two generations. Do our nutrition habits change that much over two generations? I somehow doubt it. Yeah, I mean, people become more gluttonous nowadays because people have more easy food available. Does that explain the exponential rise of obese cases? Do people have drastic? Is this a drastic effect of not having enough workout? Not people sitting too much, or is there something really harmful put into the food, like fructose corn syrup or certain hormones that are given to cattle to make them resistant against certain infections? Or is it simply like a slow build up and then you have like obesity as an overnight success that was 50 years in the making? So that would be interesting to have a correlation and to have a map where you actually would do research would vary one factor, right? The correlate the obesity map with the increase of high fructose corn syrup, or with the onset of antibiotic enrichment in food, or with the decline in workout and physical movement of people, with the onset of the internet, with the onset of TV. All these factors, just look at one factor and then see whether there's a strong correlation, and then maybe look whether there can be done more research. Maybe there is one or two factors that really are major contributors, and then you could do a little bit more research on this topic. Number 11, secret societies. So people are up in arms, like there's, how do you call these, conspiracy theories. And, well, as Rouge said in one of his recent articles, some societies don't need to be so secret to do huge decisions of which we don't really know, right? If you have a group of friends or business partners and you form a mastermind and you come together in regular, like every year or every half year, and you talk about how you can increase your business, right? Because that's what businessmen do. And then decide that you want to target your message and your products more towards a certain demographic. Like lots of advertisement is targeted towards women. Why? Because advertisements are inherently emotionally driven, right? So you sell something with emotions, right? So now, as a result, a lot of advertisements, and Mike Cernovich has talked about that, others as well, they're like predominantly women there in the forefront. And so this is not some secret plot to kick males out of public spaces or like something like that. This is just a very sound economic decision, right? And it may seem like strange or slightly creepy, but it actually is not a conspiracy. It's, as I said, a decision. Now, a lot of people in top business positions and corporate leaders, they are also very close to the media and to the news outlet. Yeah, well, if you're close to the news outlets, then you coordinate forces, right? Then you will, in a tendency, bring out more news articles that are favorable to women and favorable to minorities when you want to increase the reach to minorities. And what I want to say is that this article would be such an article that I would like to see would actually look at some societies or some connections between certain corporations and news outlets and other parts of society, and just show that actually how many companies are really on top of society, how many companies are driving society, how many thought leaders are really making an impact on the type of message they put out. It would be really good to see that, because frankly, I want to like hear more. Oh, the government is behind us, and so on and so forth. I just want to see a clear. I always want to see a clear graphic where it's shown who is connected to whom. Just a rough overview. That would already help a lot. Number 12, a source of sabotage, science under dictatorships. And one example comes to mind. Werner Heisenberg and others were directly involved in the German program to research a nuclear bomb. And it's never really clear if Heisenberg was an active part of that program or whether he tried to sabotage efforts. So he did sabotage. It becomes clear that he did sabotage scientists' effort or ridiculed them in public, made them look bad in the eyes of the Nazi regime. Scientists that were, in his mind, misguided, and scientists that were all too open and all too much on the line of the government. He made an effort to ridicule them and get them out. However, he may still have been a patriot, right? He may still have actively worked on building a nuclear bomb. So, and don't forget, the Americans were building a nuclear bomb as well. So it was kind of a race of arms. And so I'd like to know how scientists have behaved under dictatorships. Those that were responsible. If you put a scientist up and say, look, you're now responsible for developing this biological weapon. How do scientists react? Do they say, no, that's amoral? Or do they react some reacting with like glee to developing more? So what happens? Is there some sort of scientific sanity to not develop weapons or do immoral acts, or are scientists just like other people? And what are some efforts from scientists who try to prevent government atrocities? I would like to see that. that could be something. It could be something for hardcore history or some other history podcast. Number 14. Where do myths come from? So there's many stories and fictitious characters in history there but we don't know where they're actually coming from. It would be great to see where the origins are. Like where do Lord of the Rings come from originally? How do the Simpsons? How did they develop? Right? The Count of Monte Cristo, is that based on a real story? How do fiction authors get their ideas for creating their heroes, their immortal characters? Could be something for history podcast or something for literature side. Number 15, one DeLorean to beam up. How science fiction changed our life. So when I watched Star Trek in the 80s, a lot of the things that they had were like pure future fantasy. But this year, an iPad. They had electronic books. An iPhone. Basically, we can communicate to anybody all across the world, also via the internet. Via Twitter, we can immediately tweet to each other even though we are miles apart. So that's not really far from the universal communicator that you had in Star Trek, right? Maybe even a stronger reach than the universal communicator with which ground crew could communicate with the starship. And other inventions that have come true. And I would like to see which items have science fiction stories predicted that have come true. And that would be something that would lend itself to an infographic-like article, even though I don't like these sites, but it would have a good place in BuzzFeed or Huffington Post. Any blog that lends itself to infographics. You could even have it on your own account on Instagram or Pinterest. Something that makes good use of infographics, or have it on your own blog, right? So that's it. 15 ideas for articles that I would really like to see, and if possible, the publication in which they would have a good place. And thank you for watching. Enjoy the rest of the weekend. I'm looking forward to seeing you again tomorrow. If you enjoyed this video, like it so more people can see it, because it rises up in the Google ranks. And leave me a comment if you like. I answer every comment, and I hope I can provide some inspiration for you. And let me know if you think you want to write any of those articles. Maybe we can have them on my blog. And otherwise, I wish you all the best. See you again tomorrow. Bye.